Hello everyone, and welcome to my fourth video in my series covering this massive iceberg chart consisting of hundreds of entries about the Indycar series as a whole, made by brazillianhuevolution on Reddit. And in this video, I will cover the fourth tier of this iceberg, in which I will not go over every entry in this tier for the sake of time and for the sake of my sanity, as I don't want these videos to be too long to make. I have also moved around a few entries to put them in what I think is a more fitting tier. If you for some reason don't know what an iceberg chart represents, I will have past me explain, as I am exceptionally lazy. Now, if you don't know what an iceberg chart is, I will have me from the past video do the honors because I am lazy. If you don't know what an iceberg chart is, I'm lazy, and so I'll have me from the previous video explain it. Now, if by some reason you have not seen an iceberg chart or don't know what it represents, the topics nearest to the top are more well known, and as you go farther down, the more obscure and speculative they get, and at the very bottom, the most conspiratorial and disturbing facts reside. Now, with all necessities aside, time for the video. Tier 4, Marshall Pruett. IMS Museum Basement. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum was discussed in the first video of the series, but there's another section to it, the basement, which contains even more rare vintage racing cars, among many others too valuable to be exhibited in its above-ground counterpart. The collection contains not only vintage Indy cars, but also vintage F1 cars, vintage endurance racing cars, pace cars, and also many road cars. The basement was off limits to the public from its inception in 1965 until 2021, in which the staff-only restriction was lifted and guided tours were made available to the public. The IMS Museum Basement is also one of the most expensive car collections in the world, with it containing two of the most valuable cars in the world, a Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing and a Ferrari 250 LM, being front and center in the collection, making the museum a must-see for any racing or just automotive enthusiast who has the opportunity to see it. King Hiro. Hiro Matsushita, nicknamed King Hiro, is one of the first Japanese drivers to run a career in IndyCar, and is the first Japanese driver to compete in the Indy 500. He was born in 1961, and is the grandson of the founder of Panasonic, Matsuharu Matsushita, providing him ample money to fund his racing career when he started out racing motorcycles in the late 70s in his native country of Japan, before moving to racing in America, switching to open wheelers, and achieving success in Junior Series, still with Panasonic sponsorship, winning the Toyota Atlantic Championship in 1989, before moving up to the Kart Series in 1990, driving in his rookie season for Dick Simon Racing. Matsushita only scored 1 point his rookie year, and also failed to qualify for that year's 500. The next year, Matsushita continued his unremarkable form, scoring points rarely, but he got his first top 10 ever at Milwaukee, and qualified for the Indy 500, finishing 16th. Matsushita continued racing in the Kart Series the next few years, with about the same form, still scoring semi-rare points, only getting TV time when crashing, and making a few more Indy 500 starts, before quietly bowing out to focus on other ventures after the 1998 season. What Matsushita is most known for, his nickname King Hiro, came from the Indy 500 and an incident where Emerson Fittipaldi was struggling to lap Matsushita and, in his anger, said, "F***ing hero," on the radio to his team. But the radio lag cut out the first part of the expletive, leaving the team only hearing "King Hero." This became an inside joke for the Penske team, as Hero had a reputation for being a moving chicane when the leaders were lapping him, and even though Hero's driving was not noticeable enough to distinguish him from his other midfield pay drivers, that nickname is still recognizable to IndyCar fans to this day. Dr. Jack Miller. On the topic of 1990s midfield drivers, Dr. Jack Miller was a racing driver who competed in IndyCar in the late 90s, but with quite the irregular background. He was born in 1961, but instead of starting to race in his early adulthood, like all his contemporaries in IndyCar, he became a dentist. Because of this, he started his racing career relatively late, in the early 90s, at the age of 31, in Open Wheel Junior Series, using his dental background for funding and to obtain sponsorship. There is not much information on Miller's early racing career until his 1993 Indy Lights B Series Championship. He raced in Indy Lights Main Series the next few years with little success, but despite this, he made his IndyCar debut in the IRL 1996 to 1997 season with the Arizona Motorsports team with sponsorship from toothpaste company Crest. He had a dreadful season, crashing out of the first race at Disney after 86 laps, being classified 15th, and retired out of the second race at Phoenix, only 33 laps in, due to a fuel pickup problem, classified 20th. Miller only made the Indy 500 that year due to the facts that all IRL teams were guaranteed entry, but crashed out after 136 laps. More mechanical issues and a crash at Las Vegas meant Miller never finished a race that season, and was 23rd in the Drivers' Championship at the end of the season. Miller was able to find a ride for 1998 with Sinden Racing Services still in the IRL, getting one top 10, a 9th at Charlotte, but failed to qualify at Phoenix and finished quite the unspectacular 21st at Indy. Miller raced part-time in the IRL the next few years, mostly finishing outside of the top 20, with his final start at Atlanta in 2001 ending in a crash that gave Miller career-ending injuries, and he hasn't raced since. What sets Miller apart from his fellow midfield drivers was he was still a practicing dentist during his career, his sponsorship from dental companies, and his nickname, the Racing Dentist. He is still a practicing dentist, and his son, Jack William Miller, actively races in the US F2000 Championship and has also made starts in Formula 4, continuing his family's passion for racing. Danny Sullivan's former jobs. Unlike the previously discussed driver, Danny Sullivan achieved success in IndyCar, winning the 500 in 1985 and the championship in 1988. But like Miller, Sullivan started his racing career pretty late compared to other drivers. Sullivan started racing in his late 20s and early 30s and did not make his first IndyCar start until he was 32. Before his racing career, Sullivan held quite a few odd jobs, such as a lumberjack in upstate New York, a waiter at a New York City restaurant, and a New York City cab driver, which he talked about on an episode of the Beyond the Grid podcast once, which you should listen to if you want to know more details. Eddie Lawson. Another driver with a non-traditional road to IndyCar, Eddie Lawson is a retired Grand Prix motorcycle racer who, after his retirement from racing on two wheels, had a brief foray in IndyCar in the mid-90s. Lawson, born in 1958, first started his racing career with motorcycles on the dirt tracks of his native Southern California in the late 70s, but then moved to road racing in the AMA 250cc championship, finishing second in the 1979 season. He continued racing in AMA for a few years, winning the 250cc championship in 1980 and 1981, alongside also racing superbikes during that time. Lawson made his foray in international bike racing in 1983 on the Grand Prix motorcycle circuit at the behest of manufacturer Yamaha, in which he finished fourth at the end of year 500cc championship. The next year, Lawson's true speed was shown to all when he won 4 races to win the 1984 championship. Over the next 8 years of Lawson's career, he won quite a few more races and 3 more championships, before eventually deciding to retire from motorcycle racing after the 1992 season. Still feeling the drive to race, Lawson made a one-off start in the Indy Light season that year at the season-ending round at Laguna Seca, in which he finished 18th. Not bad for a competitive debut in a completely type of racing than Lawson was experienced in. Lawson raced in Indy Lights the next 2 years, getting 2 podiums out of a 6-start part-time schedule in 1993, and got 1 win at Cleveland, and 6 more podiums to 4th in the Drivers' Championship for 1994. Lawson then made the jump to IndyCar for the 1996 kart season, in which he had a solid debut season, getting 4 top 10s out of 11 starts, with best finishes of 6th at the Indy 500 and at Detroit. Lawson never raced in IndyCar after this, probably due to the fact that he was almost 40 and not the most desirable driver prospect for teams to take, and so Lawson retired from racing then and hasn't raced competitively since, but still remains active, racing vintage motorcycles and Formula 1 cars at historic events. Lawson is truly a rare driver, able to make the switch from 2-wheelers to 4, and have success in both, despite his relatively mediocre results in IndyCar. He is quite the notable driver in the anonymity of the mid-90s midfield pack due to that. Steven Tyler at the 2001 Indy 500. Celebrities at the Indy 500 are nothing rare. It is one of the biggest sporting events in the US, after all, and usually a famous singer is invited to sing the national anthem as part of the pre-race festivities. For the 2001 Indy 500, Steven Tyler, vocalist for the rock band Aerosmith, was invited to sing the national anthem. The performance was not the best ever, but not the worst. Just fine, if forgettable. That is, until the end. At the end, instead of singing Home of the Brave, the usual lyrics, he instead sang, This, obviously, just was Tyler trying to pay homage to the event through the song and to hype up the crowd, and he certainly was not trying to show ill intent towards the military or any veterans by replacing Brave with Indy 500. But many were irate at Tyler for changing what is an important song and tradition for the Indy 500 and the US in general. In the end, nothing happened to Tyler, just a statement put out by Tony George, owner of the IMS, reading, Steven Tyler's rendition of the national anthem at this year's Indianapolis 500 provoked controversy. While we are certainly sorry that some were offended, it is neither our intention nor that of Mr. Tyler to be disrespectful. All of us have the utmost respect for the sacrifice our veterans have made for us. Mario Andretti's twin brother at the 1969 Indy 500 photos. Mario Andretti is not an unknown name for IndyCar fans, but his brother, Aldo Andretti, maybe. Aldo, the twin brother of Andretti, was actually the first of the brothers to race, with him taking the two's stock car out for its first outing in 1959, in which he won. The two switched places racing the car throughout their amateur racing career, each winning 2 races the next 4 weeks, and the two brothers continued racing separately throughout the next few years, Mario in IndyCar and Aldo in sprint cars. For the 1969 Indy 500, Mario Andretti qualified second, but a few days before the photo of the front row qualifiers was going to be taken, Mario was involved in a crash in which he was burnt on his face, and him not being one to be photographed in that state, enlisted Aldo to go in his place to be pictured. They were identical twins after all. Mario eventually won the 500 that year, and when it was time for post-race pictures, he wouldn't have to enlist his brother as a stand-in. Pat Clancy Special. Throughout the history of American open-wheel racing, there have been quite a few weird concept cars to race throughout the years. One of the strangest cars to run is undoubtedly the Pat Clancy Special, which just looks like any other Indy roadster of the time, until you look at the 4 back tires, making the car have a total of 6 wheels. The car was built by its namesake, Pat Clancy, a trucking fleet operator in Memphis, to compete in the 1948 and the 1949 Indy 500. The car had a respectable running in the 48 Indy 500, finishing 12th with Billy DeVore at the wheel, but the car's next and last running at the 49 Indy 500 yielded a lesser result, with the car finishing 22nd, out after 65 laps with a drive shaft issue, with rookie Jackie Holmes at the wheel. The chassis was then turned into a more conventional 4-wheeler in an attempt to qualify for the Indy 500 a few more times, but these attempts ultimately failed in the end. Now, for the question you might be wondering, why was the car designed to have 6 wheels instead of the more conventional 4? Well, the car's designer and namesake, Pat Clancy, was experienced in trucking and knew that tandem axle trucks had more grip on windy mountain roads where he operated his trucks than traditional passenger cars. This observation didn't work for the flat and banked IMS, however, so the 6-wheel car is relegated to the past as an interesting part of IndyCar history. Hurst's floor shifter. When legendary IndyCar and NASCAR team owner and car builder Smokey Yunick was designing a car in a bid to win his 3rd Indy 500 as a car owner for 1964, he had quite the peculiar and strange concept, to say the least. The car looked like the traditional roadster style, but with the cockpit offset a few feet to the left, pretty much lying outside of the inline body. This was inspired by Yunick's experience in bombing runs in World War II, in which he saw a German BV-141 plane, one with the cockpit offset outside of the main fuselage by quite a distance. Hurst Shifters then sponsored the car after it was unveiled by Yunick in the spring of 1964, giving it its name. The car and Yunick's expectations for its success was met with skepticism due to its radical design, but what Yunick had done was make it so that the fuel in the front and the engine in the back would give even weight distribution, and the driver would weigh down the left, helping the car into the corners. This didn't work out in practice, however, as when driver Bobby Johns went into turn 1 of his qualifying attempt, he spun and destroyed the car due to brake issues, and with not enough time to fix the car before the end of qualifying, the Yunick's car's bid to compete in the 500 was over, and due to rule changes surrounding fuel loads after the 1964 race, the concept couldn't run again, and something like it hasn't been seen to this day. Steam-powered IndyCar and the IMS replica in Nevada. Throughout the history of the Indy 500, many engine concepts have been run and have won. These include traditional combustion, turbine cars, diesel cars, and more recently, hybrid engines. But one concept proposed, developed extensively, but ultimately never run, is a steam-powered IndyCar. This concept was the brainchild of Bill Lear, the man behind Learjet, the 8-track player, the AC adapter, among many other things, who started developing the steam-powered Delta configuration engine only 13 months before its first planned start at the 1969 Indy 500. The man Lear enlisted to help develop his engine, Ken Wallace, was well experienced with IndyCar engines, developing Parnelli Jones' 1967 Indy 500 turbine engine that he almost won with, but he had no experience with steam engines. This would be the downfall of the steam engine project, as with 1 month to go before the 500, the car wasn't ready, the engine wasn't built yet, and so Lear fired Wallace. Lear tried to use his steam engine technology in road cars after his failure at Indy, but the fuel crisis of the 70s led to cars getting more fuel efficient and made the steam engine concepts obsolete. Before the collapse of the steam engine project, Lear planned to build a replica of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on land he owned in northwestern Reno to test the car. He was quoted saying, "I am building an exact duplicate of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway right here." Lear said, "I mean exact. It'll be 2.5 miles, all black-topped, all banked the same curves and straights, same pits, everything. We'll start practicing here March 1st with the steam race cars, and lest this sound too fancy, remember that it'll be cheaper for us to practice here than to keep running back and forth to Indy with the cars and crews. Then, we will go to Indy with our shakedown complete." Just like the steam IndyCar, this plan never came to fruition either, with the only construction completed being some earth moving, and the only remnant that remained today is a vague oval shape in a vacant lot just outside the Reno Stead Airport. School bus engine found in the junkyard, fitted in an IndyCar. Taking engines out of cars and mounting them in your race car is nothing out of the ordinary, with early stock car racers taking engines from old ambulances and putting them in their Ford coupes for a horsepower advantage over the competition. But in IndyCar, engines were, and are, usually custom built to the specification of whatever the sanctioning body desires. For the 1980 Indy 500, veteran sprint car racer Roger Rager used quite the peculiar means to secure an engine for his car. The regulations for 1980 made it so that teams had to use stock block engines, which were road-going engines designs modified for racing, but Rager took the road-going part of the regulations a bit too literally and went to a junkyard to see what he could find. He eventually decided to take the engine out of an old Chevrolet school bus that was sitting in the junkyard and to make it ready for racing and put it in his IndyCar. After the engine was made ready, the car was prepared and qualified 10th for the 1980 Indy 500. Rager then led on laps 16 and 17, before then crashing out trying to avoid a spinning car on lap 56. Despite the early exit, this was quite the performance for a car with an engine sitting in a junkyard not a few months prior, and even though it didn't get the best finish with 23rd, it still was remarkable for its origins. Eagle Aircraft Flyer Special. When Ken Hamilton tried to qualify for the 1981 Indy 500 with an old mid-70s chassis and an old Chevy engine, he was unable to do so due to the 115 entries of the race that year, and he had to miss qualifying due to engine troubles, leaving him out of the race. This, however, attracted attention from many people in Hamilton's native state of Idaho, where multimillionaire Joe Turley, owner of Eagle Aviation, a crop dusting aircraft business, offered sponsorship and a plane engineer, Gene Wilson, to help design a new car. The car started out as a replica of the late 70s PC-7 Penske chassis, but Wilson then used his aviation experience to redesign the aerodynamics pretty radically. With Wilson designing the chassis, Hamilton supplying the suspension and the engine, and Turley funding the whole project, the car was quickly ready, and the radical design of the car was soon shown to all. The chassis looked like someone took a plain fuselage and contorted it to fit on the frame of an Indy car. It has enormous wheelbase compared to other chassis at the time, and it was made of the typical IndyCar materials, plus some more irregular ones, such as plywood and the vertical stabilizers, taken from Wilson's experience doing the same thing in crop dusters. Wilson used ground effect to produce downforce in the car, known as the DW2, but not in the traditional way using skirts, but rather tunnels in the fairings around the wheels, and other aerodynamic tunnels in the chassis. But surprisingly, no wing, as Wilson thought it wasn't necessary. The car was never tested in a wind tunnel, or tested period, until the car rolled up to the IMS through Indy 500 practice, in which it drew lots of attention due to its extremely abnormal design. When Hamilton went into turn 1 in his first practice lap, the car spun, with Hamilton barely able to save it from hitting the wall. Hamilton observed that the car wanted to spin every time he turned the wheel, and when he managed to keep the car on track for a qualifying lap, it was 12 miles per hour slower than the minimum qualifying speed. Hamilton then called Turling, said that he would not drive the car anymore, and when he proposed Turling buy an old March chassis to still qualify for the 500, Turling said he didn't have the money, as he had just bought Eagle Aviation. This was the end of the Indy 500 dream for the ragtag team of Hamilton, Wilson, and Turling, and when Hamilton's son, Davey Hamilton, asked his father about what he felt of the car, Ken said, "I don't know. I'd like to bury the son of the somewhere, but I can't find a hole deep enough." Delta Wing. In late 2008, Ben Bowlby and Chip Ganassi were discussing how to make IndyCar more marketable to the automotive industry and the general public, which had both favored NASCAR for a period of many years. The result was the Delta Wing, a car concept designed by Bowlby to maximize efficiency, having the engine power and price, but having the same speed as a contemporary IndyCar. Bowlby did this by maximizing aerodynamic efficiency, with enclosing the wheels, narrowing the front nose as much as possible, and foregoing the wing for a vertical stabilizer on the back of the car. The price of a Delta Wing would be $600,000 plus engine, and due to this, many team owners were not too insistent with adopting the chassis. In the end, the Delta Wing never saw IndyCar competition due to its extreme design and cost, but found a home in endurance racing, competing first in the 2012 24 Hours of Le Mans with an altered design under Nissan branding, and competed to the end of the 2016 World Endurance Championship season before being sidelined after due to regulation changes. 214 Gs. Third at the 2003 Indy Racing League round at the Texas Motor Speedway, the cars were racing around steadily with 13 laps to go before they entered the back straight, where fourth place Kenny Brack touched Thomas Scheckter in front of him, sending Brack into the catch fence where he hit a metal pole, absolutely shredding his chassis apart and sending the cockpit spinning down the track, down to the apron where it came to a rest. Many, no doubt, feared that Brack was dead, as this was an extremely brutal crash, but he was still alive, if severely injured and unconscious. It is miraculous that Brack survived, and shows testament to the design of the IRL chassis at the time that absorbed the impact enough to protect Brack, which was measured at 214 Gs. That's 214 times the force of gravity you feel right now, and for more perspective, the human body will sustain severe injuries over 30 Gs, and will certainly die exposed to over 50 Gs unprotected. While Brack survived, he took 18 months to recover from a broken femur, crushed ankles, and a shattered vertebrae, and this pretty much ended his racing career, with him only making one IndyCar start after his horrific crash. However, he is still lucky to be alive. IndyCar lost media. Throughout the long history of broadcasting for IndyCar, it is inevitable that one or two races out of the thousands ever broadcast would be lost to history due to the video being stuck in some archive closet somewhere, unavailable to the public, or simply due to the analog material it was recorded on degrading and not being recoverable. IndyCar races have been shown on TV since the entertainment medium's growth in the 50s, but not live. Rather, a highlight reel being shown a few days or weeks after. The first IndyCar race to be shown on TV was the 1949 Indy 500, in which the local Indianapolis TV station, WFBM TV, broadcasted to a few thousand local TVs, and coverage of the race from a few cameras located alongside the front stretch, which is unfortunately lost in time, with only a little bit of the whole broadcast remaining. Third in 1950 Indy 500 and beyond, TV coverage was prohibited by the Speedway because they thought that people watching the race from home would hurt attendance. First IndyCar race broadcast live and in color was the 1968 Tony Benthausen 100 at the Indianapolis State Fairgrounds, but the full hour-and-a-half race broadcast has been lost to history, with only a few small snippets being available to watch today. Quite a few more IndyCar races have been lost, too many to cover, so I'll only be going over the more notable ones from now on. The 1979 Jimmy Bryan 150, held at the Phoenix Raceway, was the first ever race for IndyCar under the sanctioning of CART, was broadcast flag to flag, but the full hour-long running is unfortunately lost. The 1971 Pocono 500, the inaugural running of the Crown Jewel race, was shown to TV audiences as a full race 2 weeks after it was held, but that version, broadcast on Century, is lost, with only an hour-long, clipped-up version of the race remaining. The full 1976 Indy 500 was shown on ABC a few hours after the race was finished, but it, for some reason, was never re-aired, and a copy of the recording has never shown up, and like so many other races, only a few separate clips remain. The most notable race whose recording has been lost to time is probably the 1981 Pocono 500, which was sanctioned by USAC. Due to the ongoing USAC CART split going on at the time, USAC had to fill the field with dirt cars to get a full field on track, and it is remembered as the time when Indy cars faced off against dirt cars. An hour-long highlight reel was broadcast 2 weeks later, but this version is lost to history, although it is theorized that the IMS Museum might have a copy in its archives. I find lost media pretty interesting, and to have examples of it in IndyCar just makes it even more so, but it is a bit sad to see the notable races which shaped the history of IndyCar not able to be watched from flag to flag anymore. AAA x USAC. Over the years, IndyCar has gone through a couple of sanctioning bodies, with the transition between one and the other usually being a messy period in which the two series ran separately, and the one that held on the longest coming out on top to rule IndyCar in the years to come. But considering this, the first transition between IndyCar sanctioning bodies was surprisingly peaceful. AAA was the body which had sanctioned IndyCar and the Indy 500 since the two's founding in the early 1900s up until 1955. At that year's running of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, when on lap 36, the Austin Healey of Lance Macklin hit the Mercedes of Pierre Levay, sending Levay into an embankment and up into the grandstands. Levay and 83 spectators were tragically killed in the accident, with upwards of 120 more being injured. This tragic accident left scars on the racing world, and that, alongside the death of two-time 500 winner Bill Volkovich at that year's 500, were the main reasons for AAA to announce that they were going to stop sanctioning IndyCar at the end of that year to focus on their other automotive efforts. The Sports Car Club of America and NASCAR took interest in taking over the sanctioning duties of IndyCar, but USAC, the United States Auto Club, which was an organization formed by IMS owner at the time, Tony Holman, took over sanctioning duties through the 1956 season, no doubt because of Holman's influence over IndyCar due to his possession of the IMS. USAC would then sanction IndyCar for 23 years until a series of factors I discussed in the first video of the series led to the 1979 to 1981 USAC X-CART split, in which CART had the upper hand in the end and left USAC only sanctioning the Indy 500. Oval tracks made out of wooden planks. In the 1910s and 1920s, the fastest and most dangerous tracks in the world were not 2.5-mile superspeedways, not undulating 10-mile plus tours through forest, but instead high bank tracks made out of wood, which were called board tracks, which were spread all across America. The first board track ever constructed was the circular 1-mile-long Los Angeles Motordrome, whose design was inspired by European velodromes used for bicycle racing, with its high banking of over 40 degrees, 7 degrees more than Talladega, and its wooden construction. In the years following, many more board tracks were constructed across the nation. Motorcycles originally raced on these tracks, but in the 1920s, Indy cars then took to these tracks due to their popularity and speed, with attendance and velocities in these races sometimes exceeding those of the Indy 500, and due to the cheap construction of these tracks, allowing them to be widespread throughout the nation in many well-populated metropolitan areas. Board tracks eventually fell out of favor due to the fragility of the track surface and the high cost of replacement of the planks, and the relatively mediocre racing the tracks produced as overtakes at the extremely high speeds cars were racing at those tracks were risky and could cause fatal crashes. Most board tracks disappeared in the 30s, but some stuck around into late 30s and early 40s before eventually disappearing altogether and being relegated to the history books, probably for the better. 2015 NOLA GP. Louisiana is not a state known for motor racing, despite it being located in NASCAR's homeland of the southeastern US, and only a few races from major sanctioning bodies have ever occurred in the state. One of these was the Indy Grand Prix of Louisiana, held at the NOLA Motorsports Park as the second round of the 2015 IndyCar season. The days before the race were extremely wet, with the rain falling constantly and lightning strikes leading to qualifying being cancelled. Due to this, the starting grid was set from the point standings at the time, which meant that Juan Pablo Montoya took pole position for race day. When race day came, the track was still wet, but the rain had stopped falling, and so the race was started and ran without any major incidents until lap 12, when Tony Kanaan spun into the very muddy grass, struggling to get back on track, and lap 13, where Gabby Chavez did the same thing, but required the help of a track worker pushing him to get out. This caused a yellow flag, and when the cars came for the restart, James Jakes and Jack Hawksworth touched, sending Hawksworth into the tire barrier. From the restart, from this yellow flag period, Stefano Coletti spun while coming to the green, before crashing hard into the wall. Quite a few cars pitted, and James Hinchcliffe, who didn't pit, led Carlos Huertas for the restart, before Huertas spun and bought out the yellow again. James Hinchcliffe then led a green flag run, which was ended when Simon Pagenaud and Ryan Hunter-Reay crashed and collected Sebastian Bourdais, who slammed into the tire barrier after sliding through the muddy grass. This yellow flag period lasted until the end of the race, giving Hinchcliffe the win. This was quite the chaotic and entertaining race, full of a variety of incidents, won by a fan-favorite driver, but despite this, the race was cancelled for the next year, as it had lost quite a bit of money, as only 10,000 spectators had showed up in bad weather to watch this oddity of a race. 2002 Honda Indy 300. For the 17th round of the 2002 Kart Series season, held at the Surfers Paradise Street Circuit, the weekend looked all too conventional, with points leader Cristiano de Mata taking pole. But when race day came, torrential rains dredged the circuit, leading drivers to question if the race should go ahead, but it ultimately did, as the date and the TV schedule would be too difficult to alter. As the car came to the green, egregious amounts of spray were generated, and a huge crash occurred where multiple cars were involved, and the car of Adrian Fernandez then plowing into the chaos. Fernandez and Torque Takagi were injured due to this, and would not rejoin the race when it was restarted an hour later, under caution, with the drivers involved in the opening crash that were uninjured switching to their backup cars. Conditions were better for the restart, were dim at LED, but then quickly deteriorated again, and with 10 laps completed, the caution was brought out for more heavy rain. The yellow lag lasted for quite a few laps, in which CART stated that the race would be called just over half distance at lap 36. The leader at the time, Michael Andretti, timed his strategy so that he would be out front, but when lap 36 came along, CART announced that the race would be extended for 5 more laps, for no reason whatsoever, as conditions looked set to remain the same, meaning that Andretti and many others would have to pit for fuel. This call to extend the race was criticized from many teams as pointless. Rookie Mario Dominguez then cycled to the front, as others pitted, and stayed there when the checkered flag flew, giving him his first CART win, and ending this weird race in quite a weird manner. IndyCars at Dover. Dover Motor Speedway, also known as the Monster Mile, is known for being a NASCAR-centric venue, hosting one race a year for the Cup, Xfinity, and ARCA series nowadays. But it has had a few times in which IndyCar teams have made the journey to compete on the famous Monster Mile. The first time was in 1969, in which Art Pollard took his Plymouth to victory lane in his second win of the season. IndyCar didn't return to the track for 30 years, until during the second IndyCar split, in which the Indy Racing League, which had hosted races at other NASCAR-centric venues, such as Charlotte and Atlanta Motor Speedway, would take the trip up to New Hampshire for the 1998 Pep Boys 400K. The first signs of trouble appeared in practice, where Alessio Salazar suffered a brutal crash, where he broke his right arm and leg, hip, and pelvis. Tony Stewart took pole during qualifying, and he led when the green flag flew. A period of 22 laps went by before the yellow came out due to a multiple car crash involving Scott Goodyear, Jeff Ward, and Jack Miller after Ward's suspension failed. The next crash occurred on lap 100 when Sam Smith hit the wall, destroying the right side of his car. Not much time passed before the next incident occurred, where Eddie Cheever and Greg Ray made contact and hit the wall, showering the track with debris. Many other incidents occurred up until the finish, where Scott Sharp won a very crash-heavy race, with 11 drivers retiring due to various reasons. The cause for the many incidents and crashes is because the cars were too fast and had too much grip for the high banking and rough surface of Dover. Despite this, the IRL returned to the track the next year in 1999 for the MBNA Mid-Atlantic 200, where the previous year's crashes and carnage were substituted for pure boredom, with cars running single file for the first 34 laps, before the leader and second place starter Scott Sharp blew a tire and hit hard into the wall. This pattern was repeated all throughout the race, with cars running in single file and yellows coming out sporadically for crashes. The worst crash occurring was when Elio Salazar's rear wing failed, sending him into the wall destroying not an insignificant part of his car, but luckily left him uninjured. Greg Ray took the checkered flag after making a great race pass on Mark Dismore and surviving a restart to take the second win en route to his first IRL championship. After this, IndyCar has never returned to Dover due to the obvious safety risks, boring single-file racing, and due to the horrendous attendance. I mean, just look at the grandstands during the 1999 race. Aside from a small populated patch, they're just completely deserted, making a good visual metaphor for the success of IndyCar's short-lived tenure at the Dover Motor Speedway. Langhorne Speedway. Langhorne Speedway was one of the first ever super speedways built, oval tracks with a distance of a mile or more, and it was a staple of racing in the US from its construction in the 1920s to its closure in the 70s. The design of the speedway was quite weird, with it being an entirely circular layout, with no straightaways being present. This proves quite the safety risks, as if the car suffered understeer, steering failure, or just made contact with another car, they simply went out over the banking and out of the track, leading to the track collecting a total of 18 driver fatalities over its lifespan. IndyCar raced at Langhorne from 1930 into the switch of sanctioning bodies from AAA to USAC in the 50s, and through the track's paving and reconfiguration from the circular to a rough D shape in the mid-60s, and then the last ever IndyCar race at the circuit in 1970. The track was then sold and demolished to make way for suburban development, and now sits paved over by parking lots and box stores to this day, a forgotten relic of early racing in the US that paved the way for the expansion of NASCAR, IndyCar, and many other types of racing altogether. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this exploration into the fourth tier of the Indycar Iceberg. If you liked the video, make sure to like it. If you like the content on my channel, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.